Thank you, Marissa. And I just want to appreciate, I was saying to Marissa earlier, like the Ann Arbor District Library for doing so much during Pride Month. I think it's really outstanding, especially as we're seeing attacks on public libraries doing things like this. And ours is doubling down and doing more even into July with the big gay read. So thank you, and thank you for the invitation to come. And thank you all for joining. I'm going to do some presenting, but I also, want to offer opportunity for you all to share where you're at and what's important to you, because I think we need spaces to be together as people who care about LGBTQ people and who are LGBTQ. So generally, we're going to go over sort of the state of equality. Where are we? Where are we headed? And how do we get through this? So first, I think it's important to just sort of say, like, why do we care? Like, why do LGBTQ issues matter? And for me personally, you can see me and my family here on the right, our son. I think it's just really important as queer parents. But, here in Washtenaw County, we actually have one of the highest rates of same-sex couples among the state of Michigan. So in Michigan, there are about 9 same-sex couples per 1,000 households, and 20% of them are raising kids, which is amazing. And that's data from the census. And then data from Gallup shows that in the state of Michigan, about 4% of the population identify as LGBT, and about 27% of them are raising kids. So these are our friends, our neighbors, they're part of their communities. And so I think these issues matter to all of us for different reasons. So I wonder if anyone would want to share, like, why do LGBTQ issues matter to you? You don't have to, but I didn't warn you, Marissa, that you were going to may have to run a mic around.
We are streaming this also, just so you know.
Oh, yeah, if you would prefer to not be.
That impacts your choices.
Yeah.
I mean, they matter to me as a queer person. They impact me directly. And yeah.
Great.
That's number one.
Yeah. Some of us are directly impacted.
I'm not a queer person, but people I love are. So
Great.
To me.
Yeah, our family and friends and people we love.
Well, my spouse and I are kind of scared. We got married 11 years ago when it became legal in Michigan, and we worry about being unmarried against our will.
Yeah, there's a lot happening right now, a lot of fear and concern. Great. Thank you for sharing. So I think it's really important before we sort of dive into like where we are and the fear and the concern that many of us have to just take a minute to breathe. I can say for me, I was sharing with Marissa, like me and my staff as an LGBTQ organization, the last 5 months have just been a whirlwind. 4.5 months have been a whirlwind. And I think for all of us, the news every day is a lot. And so just taking a minute to breathe, to center yourself, feel the ground, feel the chair you're sitting in, and that we are okay. We are here, we're with community, and we're in a safe place. So before we get going, I just want to give a second to ground yourself a little bit. Okay, so where are we today? At the highest level, there's a few points I want to make sure we walk away with. One is there's definitely a sustained focus on, particularly in the states, on passing anti-trans legislation, especially as it impacts trans youth and education issues. We also are seeing states sort of pulling to the polls. We're seeing good states do good things and bad states continuing to do bad things. I think it's also important to note that winning is happening, but what winning looks like might look different in this moment, but it is happening and we are winning, including in some surprising places. There's definitely a lot of interplay between the federal government and what's happening, the federal government led by the Trump administration, and what's happening in states, and that is very troubling for many of us. And at the federal level, we are seeing an all-out attack by the federal government, particularly against trans people, basically arguing that trans people don't exist, and that sort of this is all gender ideology. And there are legal challenges moving, thanks to all of our legal groups, and just so much appreciation for the fights that are happening in the courts, and hoping that those wins continue. So we're going to dive in a little bit to each of these. So I think it's really critical to just show how fast things have shifted in the states. So this map is as of January 1st, but you can see that just since 2020, we have states that have passed at least one of four anti-trans policies that include bans on medical care for youth, bans on sports participation for youth, bans on bathroom access, it might be in schools or other government buildings, and so-called gender regulation laws, which is essentially the state saying we define sex to mean X, to essentially to define out of existence recognition for trans people. And so the states in the darkest color are states that have passed all four of those. And none of these laws existed before 2020. So you can see how fast we have gotten to the place that we are. And this map has changed because this was January. I think that, I can't understate how much the effort has been focused on trans people and including trans youth, but we're also seeing a lot around education. So bills called curriculum censorship is sort of the bucket that we put them into. That's banning what books can be in school libraries. That's don't say gay laws, although we would argue those laws often go farther than that, saying teachers can't talk about the civil rights movement. They can't talk about the enslavement of Black people. They can't talk about sexual orientation in the classroom. We're seeing a lot of anti-DEI laws that, again, are often broader than LGBTQ, but we've seen offices on campuses devoted to supporting Black students, queer students, shut down, particularly at state universities. We have seen bills, we're calling them sort of forced outing bills, basically say if a kid at school, tells a teacher that I would like to have you use this pronoun for me or this name, that the state has actually come in and said that those teachers have to report that to parents. And it's really taking away the sort of safety that kids feel at school and the flexibility that I think many of us, whether we were trans or not, enjoy in creating your own world at school, sort of under this guise of parental rights and parent fear about what's happening at schools. As I mentioned, sports bans on restroom access, and healthcare bans have definitely moved. The first anti-LGBTQ bill that passed this year was passed in Ohio, and it was a school bill that included it included a forced outing component as well as a don't say gay piece for grades K through 3. So, the book, Heather Has Two Mommies, or the Penguin book, those books can't be in a child's classroom. And, I can say as a queer parent, it's been really important for my kid to see our family reflected in really basic materials that certainly aren't getting into anything about sexuality, that are just about sometimes people have different families that look different ways. But in Ohio, that would not be permitted. I don't know if we'll be able to get these to work. Let's see. So I mentioned that things are moving really quickly, and so I have a series of these. I'm gonna have to somehow share this. I wonder if my IT person might be able to help me. It will play. So I see the image on my screen, but I don't see it here. Sorry, we should have worked on this before. We'll see if we can get it to work. But essentially what I'm hoping we'll be able to show is since 2000 to today, what have we seen the progression of 3 key laws? And those are censorship, school censorship bills, bans on healthcare for trans youth, and the sport participation bills. Oh. Sorry.
You're okay.
Making problems. There we go. Okay.
Just go back in full screen.
Okay. So this is those curriculum censorship bills, and each state is a little different, what grades are covered or what topics, but the point is this is sort of where we are. And so at the end of 2020, there were states that had these. A lot of them were kind of old school, where they really came about during the 1980s related to HIV education, where states didn't want people talking about homosexual sex, basically. And they have morphed now in this new iteration to really be much broader than that, where it's not about sex education, it's about any concept, talking about Harvey Milk, talking about anything. So let's hit play here. So you can see that we're now at 19 states, where we started with about 5 at the beginning of 2020. So again, just how incredibly quickly these have progressed. Let's see. And then if we do the same, of course, I'm not a Mac person. It's okay.
I think we might need you.
Just show me how to click that. I don't need to go back to slideshow yet, but if we can just open that link.
Yeah, I think it just needs to like play.
Ah, great.
This is a little
There it is.
silly,
Oh, look
but
at that. It worked. Okay, so at the end of 2020, this is the one that I think is just really, truly remarkable when you think about how rapidly policy changes. We don't see this kind of policy change happen in the United States on very many issues. But there were no states at the end of 2020 that banned healthcare for trans youth. And where you will see that we end up is now we have 27 states, so more than half the country has banned access to health care that is medically necessary, that is provided under standards of care that are recognized by medical associations, but this is where we've now ended up. And literally any day now, today was a potential day for a decision, but any day now the US Supreme Court will be ruling on the ban in Tennessee. There was a challenge that went up as to whether the state can ban this kind of care and exclude parents and doctors from making decisions about their kids' health care. And then the last one. This is another one, and I know this topic has been in the news a lot, in part because in California, there was a high school student that competed in track and field and ended up on the podium, which is exciting, and she had to share a medal with another student because of the way they were trying to figure out how to address the fact that a trans girl was good at sports. So this is where we were in Idaho at the end of 2020. You see we have one state. So again, we're here at 28 states. And again, just the rapid speed at which this has moved, I think speaks to a real intentional effort on the part of anti-LGBTQ opponents to drum up fear and misinformation about what's happening. You know, trans girls are not winning every category of sport across the country. Here in Michigan, the Michigan Athletic Association said that there were no trans students playing sports this current school year. So, you know, this is not something that there's a huge issue that we need to be addressing, and yet lawmakers are acting very quickly. Okay, that's the last of my things, so thank you. As I mentioned, anti-DEI bills, I think, are another area where, especially as LGBTQ people, we know we have a lot of racial and ethnic diversity in our community, and this is a place where we can be working together with allies. We have seen just a huge proliferation of anti-DEI bills. And this is actually just 2023 and 2024, the number of states that introduced and then passed legislation. And we saw that 42 states introduced anti-DEI bills. Thankfully, only 23 of those passed. But again, this is another one where it's the speed at which this moved, often sort of in a mischaracterization of what DEI is. And of course, we know that here at the University of Michigan, living in Ann Arbor, this is a hot topic, and certainly federally as well. So as I mentioned, I think we're definitely seeing states pulling to the polar extremes. So we at MAP track 50 or so state laws and policies across the country on our equality maps, and we put them together into sort of a tally. And so this is what the tally looked like in June 2020. So you can see about 15 states in that high category, and then about 13 states in that negative category. And if we fast forward to today, this is where we are. So the high states didn't change, but we saw a few states in the medium category move up, including, excitingly, Michigan. We've had some really exciting innovations here in Michigan. But you can see that the negative states have pulled. 2 more states moved negative. And so there's definitely, the bad states are getting worse, and the good states are starting to do some interesting policy innovation. A few things that I want to highlight related to that in the sort of extremes is if you looked at the map, let's say in 2004, when we had ballot measures banning marriage, the map might not look that different than this map, or when Obergefell in 2015, when the states that passed marriage look not that different than the green states that we have now. And the states that had very explicit bans and were enforcing those bans and hadn't touched them are basically those red and orange states. So in some ways, this map is familiar on LGBTQ issues, and in some ways, we have just moved very far. So I want to highlight just for a minute, like, what does winning look like? A lot of bills get introduced, and a lot of them never make it out of a committee. That is a win. You may not hear about it on the news, but that is a win. And there are advocates working quietly behind the scenes, sometimes advocates that you might be surprised by. It might be a Republican lobbyist that is talking to the committee chair and saying, I know you're getting pressure. This would just not be good. Can you just let it die? And so I just want to say, we are currently tracking about 700 anti-LGBTQ bills that have been introduced this year. Most of those will never make it out of a committee, and that is because of the hard work of our movement. I think we're also working really well in coalition to grow the tent, to help more people understand how our issues matter, but also how they fit into bigger issues of bodily autonomy, about quality education, about these other pieces. And we're also advancing positive legislation. So let's dive into that a little bit more. So as I mentioned, our movement kills most of the anti-LGBTQ bills that get introduced. When we look over the last 15 years, 92% of those bills did not get passed and make it into law. I don't want to minimize the ones that did, especially the last 4 years. Those bills have been devastating and have had serious consequences, but this is still remarkable, and I think we need to sort of dig more into how did we do that? So if we look at more into the data, you can see down here at the bottom, the orange line, that's the number of bills introduced over time. So you can see a dramatic spike in 2021, 22, and then, wow, 2023, 571 bills. And this is, I would say, a more modest number of bills. This is like solely LGBTQ focused. We at MAP are tracking about 700, as I mentioned, because we take a broader view of like some of those anti-DEI bills might fall into our bucket. But regardless, you're just seeing a huge increase in the bills. And then you can see down at the bottom, the orange, that is the number of bills that get passed. So still a lot more bills getting passed. But I would draw your attention to the green line. So this is, of the bills introduced, how many go into law? And we continue to hover above 90%. And that is, again, I think, incredible. And I think the narrative of all of the anti-LGBTQ attacks, I think, needs to be counterbalanced with, we're good at stopping a lot of things from happening. So a little trivia question for y'all. In which state this year, this state leg session, were all anti-LGBTQ bills defeated? Florida, Texas, or Michigan? So I hear a Texas. Anyone else think Texas? Okay, how about Florida? Anyone think Florida? I know we have a lot of feelings about Florida, especially this week. Or Michigan. Anyone think we made it through state leg with all the bills being defeated? Okay, we have one vote for Michigan. So as of May 21st, and things have changed a little bit, but this is still true. The states on the left are states that adjourned their state leg session, and not a single anti-LGBTQ bill passed. And I would point you to Florida. Now, Florida did a lot of horrible things the last few years, so I don't want to give them too much credit because they've basically already done all the stuff that they could do, but they're innovating in really bad ways continuously. And so the fact that we made it through with nothing, I think, is a huge win. Interestingly, Alaska, Arizona, the importance of having a Democratic governor is that those bills all made it through, and she vetoed every single one, and they did not have enough to override her veto. Similarly, Virginia has a Republican governor, and so the fact that bills didn't make it to his desk. I want to point you over here to the folks on the right. These states are still in session. There have been bad bills introduced, and you'll note there are blue states up here. Bad bills get introduced in blue states too. They just don't ever make it, or we hope never make it. And so you can see that Louisiana, for example, is still in session, but the bills haven't moved, and that's not a blue state. Here in Michigan, we are still in session. The House is doing things. The Senate will probably not allow them to move forward. So we do know, and many of you probably heard, we did have a bill introduced around regulating who can participate in sports, banning trans kids from playing sports. It has died in the Senate. It would be vetoed by Governor Whitmer, but it did pass in the House. I do want to highlight Missouri. Missouri is probably the most active state this year with 40 to 60 anti-LGBTQ bills. Only one was successful, and it is being challenged in the courts. Keep an eye on Missouri. They are going to be running a ballot measure next year, an anti-trans and anti-abortion ballot measure next year. So there's going to be a lot of conversation about Missouri. But I think the fact that it's both repro and anti-trans allows for some of that coalition building, and how do we sort of defeat things. So it's not all doom and gloom, and I think we really need to focus on what is happening in states that is positive. We have seen a lot of progress on access to identity documents in really good ways. So for example, Illinois recently got rid of their publication notification. So trans people who want to update their driver's license or their birth certificate used to have to publish their name. For their birth certificate, used to have to publish their name so that someone could say, oh, it's fraudulent, or they committed a crime against me or something. They got rid of that publication requirement. And importantly, when you think about where Illinois sits on the map, they also got rid of, they dropped their residency requirement from 6 months to 3 months. So now someone who moves from Missouri, a trans person, moves from Iowa, now can get an accurate identity document in Illinois in 3 months. And especially knowing what we know about what's happening at the federal level around getting a passport, having at least one document that has your name, that says who you are, that you can move through the world is really, really critical. Michigan also updated their identity document law recently. We have also seen exciting bills around protection for trans healthcare, including most recently in Colorado, as well as expanding state definitions of infertility to include queer families. So it's much easier to get insurance to cover reproductive health care instead of having to prove infertility for a year. It's like, well, what does that look like when you're a queer family? So that's been exciting. You know, I heard someone say that they're worried about marriage. We have seen several states get rid of either constitutional amendments or statutory bans on marriage equality. So most recently, for example, Colorado. So the voters in November in Colorado repealed a constitutional amendment banning marriage. And then just in the last couple of months, the state legislature in Colorado got rid of their statutory ban. So now there is no outdated, currently unenforceable ban on marriage in Colorado. We still have some work to do here in Michigan on that note. And the last one I want to highlight in particular is kind of family recognition. We are seeing several states, there's 9 or 10 states that have taken action recently to make it easier for queer families to establish legal ties to their children so that you don't have to go through a whole adoption process, maybe getting fingerprinted or having a home visit, just so you can have your name on your kid's birth certificate, which is something that my wife had to do when we lived in Illinois. And so currently, for example, here in Michigan, we updated the law, this was at the bill signing a year ago, to both remove a felony ban on surrogacy and update our parental recognition laws. And when we think about coalition building, I think it's really interesting to see what happened here in Michigan, which was there were a bunch of cis, straight, white ladies who, some of them had cancer, some of them had some fertility issues, some of them had really serious health issues, and they wanted to have families using surrogacy. And that was a felony in Michigan. And so they wanted to change that law. And a couple of LGBTQ folks, not here in Michigan, but in other states, and some lawyers were like, well, if you're gonna open up that parentage section and the section around parentage laws, let's do better. Let's like really get it up to snuff. And so they ended up including some really important provisions for kids born using assisted reproduction, like my kid, was conceived using a donor sperm. And so now our families don't have to go through that same process. If a kid is born to a couple at a hospital now in Michigan, this was as of June 1st. If a kid was born in here in Michigan, my wife would just sign a piece of paper saying, I am the parent of this child. It's a voluntary acknowledgement of parentage, and within 30 days that becomes a full court order. So there's no need to go through that second parent adoption and all these different pieces. So it's really exciting, and there's other states that are doing this too. So let's talk a little bit more about Michigan. We, again, track lots of state laws and policies, and we score them. So Michigan sits sort of in what we would call our medium category, although 30 out of 49, you can see that we skew higher. We are certainly, and then you can see for sexual orientation and gender identity. So what are some of these policies? We have made really great progress recently, thanks in part to change in kind of the representation in our state legislature because of voting reforms, thinking about those other issues that impact issues we care about. We have redistricting, and there's been some changes in the state-led legislature. So we have had a lot of progress over the last couple of years. Modernizing parentage laws, amending the Elliott-Larsen discrimination law to include sexual orientation and gender identity, banning conversion therapy, updating our hate crime law to include sexual orientation and gender identity, and then updating the identity documents process. I wonder what LGBTQ-related change would you like to see here in Michigan, sort of at the legal or legislative level? Are there topics that people, like your pet project?
I guess what I'd like to see, and obviously since we're not in the high category, there's more laws to be passed, but I'd like to see more robust enforcement of existing laws.
Great. Yeah. I mean, certainly passing a law is one thing, but if, there's no one to enforce it and there's no one to do the public education around it, that's a problem. Yeah. I will say, for example, here in Ann Arbor, we have a non-discrimination ordinance. We've had one for a very long time. And yet I'm sure that there are still people in Ann Arbor who are experiencing discrimination when they go out for a restaurant or when they try to rent an apartment. And yet we do have a Human Rights Commission that is meant to enforce that, and now the state will take those complaints, but there's a lot of hoops to get through to do that, and people might not even know. So yeah, more robust enforcement. Anyone else? Yeah.
I had a question about the conversion ban, conversion therapy ban. It's not technically a ban, is it, on conversion therapy? It's more like funding is cut off for anybody who's like state, I don't know, maybe you can explain it better than me, but as I understand it, there are still religious organizations who engage in conversion therapy and basically try to, put kids through that torturous process.
Yeah.
And they can do that because there's no law against it per se, it's just that they don't get any state funding. Is that about right?
So there's two different issues there. One is sort of the conversion therapy ban currently is around sort of insurance and access to payments. But even in states that have passed more robust conversion therapy bans, it is always related to licensed providers, mental and physical health care providers. There is always an exemption for religious entities. Religious entities generally get a lot of leeway on a lot of things. And we do know that most people who have experiences of conversion therapy, it is coming from through a religious lens, whether or not the person who is doing that is a priest or a pastor or someone in that capacity, but it is often flavored with conversion therapy or is flavored with religion. And those, there is definitely a balancing of, freedom of religion against these other pieces, which is why many of them have been crafted to just go after kind of, because it is such a discredited practice, to focus on licensed providers. This fall, the U.S. Supreme Court will be hearing oral arguments on a challenge to a conversion therapy case from a provider in Colorado who is licensed, but she is religious. And she is claiming that the Colorado law banning conversion therapy violates her freedom of speech. And so the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments, and we will have a decision by this time next year. Given this court, I don't feel super optimistic because they have definitely been pushing the bounds around religious freedom and expression. So there will be things to watch there. Ann Arbor, the city, actually has a ban on conversion therapy as well. To our knowledge, there is not conversion therapy being practiced in the city of Ann Arbor, but I think to your point, both around enforcement but also education, just having that ordinance, I think helps people know, someone might want to talk to you about your kid came out. How are you feeling about that? Maybe you're feeling confused or sad. Here's something we could try, and for parents to know that is not legitimate. That is deeply harmful, and so much so that our city took a stance against it. So I have a few things that I would like to see us do here in Michigan. We don't have a sort of more streamlined way for parents to complete a second parent adoption. So that could be the case where, you know, a single person has a child and marries someone and they want to more easily have that child be recognized, or they didn't do that voluntary acknowledgement right at birth. A much more easy way to say, this person's been parenting, this is the parent. Don't make us jump through all the hoops. We don't have great family leave laws in this state, and they're definitely not inclusive of different kinds of families to say, you know, this is a partner or this is a child that I care for, but I might not be legally recognized. So I'd like to see that. We have a school non-discrimination law, but we don't actually have an anti-bullying law. On the far other end from curriculum censorship bills are actually laws in a few states that require school curriculum to be inclusive of LGBTQ history and people. I think that sounds amazing. I'm sure that here in Ann Arbor, that is happening to some degree, but to be able to have standards for the state of what kids should learn, especially because here in Michigan, we have some really important history, including here in Ann Arbor. And so for kids to learn that is important. There is an emerging kind of evolution right now called healthcare shield laws. So this is in response to bans on healthcare for trans kids. Other states are saying, you can bring your child here to get care, and we will protect you from law enforcement while you are here and not allow you to be prosecuted and not allow those healthcare providers to be prosecuted. And so several states have done that. I think that's something that we could and should do here in Michigan. And the last one is more around fertility coverage. And so this is updating insurance laws, as I mentioned, to make sure that for state-regulated insurance plans, even for Medicaid, that queer families have family building coverage mandated to be covered so that we don't have to go out of pocket and spend thousands of dollars to try to build families. I think I have a question.
Okay. I don't like talking in the microphone, but anyways, the healthcare shield law, I mean, you talk about the kids and everything else. The problem that I'm seeing too, I have a nephew who is going through the transition. He's an adult and he lives in Bloomfield Hills, and he cannot now get his estrogen that he needs to do this transition. And is there any healthcare shield laws for adults out there? Or is the adults struggling as much as these kids are?
Yeah. So currently in the state of Michigan, there are no laws prohibiting doctors from prescribing either cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers, although you wouldn't use a puberty blocker in an adult, but there are no laws prohibiting that. So I don't know what the challenge is. That it might be insurance coverage might actually be the bigger issue. I'm not sure. But we don't actually have a law banning that. And there are some interpretations of the reproductive rights ballot measure that we passed 2 years ago that would say that we actually have enshrined in our state constitution access to reproductive care that includes gender-affirming care. And so as long as we don't have then a state bill that tries to ban that care and the courts would have to figure that out, we don't actually have that problem. The issue that is coming up for trans adults in this country accessing care is primarily if they are on Medicaid, because the federal government does get to decide what kind of care people can access when using federal insurance. And so that may be part of it. And we're seeing a chilling effect because of the Trump administration sort of coming after healthcare providers. But again, that's typically in the youth space. So I would encourage the person you know to reach out to Equality Michigan or to the ACLU of Michigan to talk about what's happening, because it doesn't sound like it should be happening. Okay, so that was a great segue into obviously what we've been seeing at the federal level, a slew of executive orders on a range of topics, including one on day one about gender ideology that has had a whole ripple effect throughout many areas of life. The good news is that most of these things have been challenged, but some of them have gone into effect. And we've also seen Congress trying to get in on the anti-trans action in particular. So for example, the House passed a sports regulation bill, passed in the House. Thankfully, it died in the Senate. And again, this is a win Like, we need to claim that victory. Every single Democrat voted against the bill in the Senate. That is a win. We know that sports are a particular issue. There's a lot of rhetoric. That was a hard vote for some Democrats. It shouldn't be, but it was. So I'm going to stop there. And I just wanted to say, like, you can stay up to date on all of these topics, and I'm happy to answer questions. And we can get more into the federal space. We didn't do as much, but you should find out your state equality group, which is Equality Michigan here. Community Center, we have one here in Ann Arbor. There are others across the state. You can always look at the current policy landscape on our website. We track 50 state laws and policies. We update in real time, so the minute the bill is either signed by the governor or goes into effect, we are updating. You can also look at what bills are moving in your state. The ACLU has a bill tracker you can access on your website. And we have some great tips and tools on our website about how to have conversations with people. I think what's really important is that now is the time to keep talking about your experiences and what matters to you and what matters to the people around you. We can't just close off and put the blanket over our heads. There are many people who are susceptible to misinformation, particularly about trans people and trans kids. And the more that we can share our experiences, the experience of people that we love and that we care about, and why we think it's important, the more we can do that hard work. And I will end with, it is the 10-year anniversary of Obergefell, extending marriage equality. I moved to Ann Arbor in 2004. That fall, there was a ballot measure banning marriage. To think about the work that we did, the big work and the little work, the conversations, the talking to Republicans, the talking to your grandparents, the talking to people to get marriage, support for marriage as high as we did, is because we did that hard work. And we can do it, and we need to do it. And we need to really focus on building that hearts and minds work. And it's not for everyone, but I think it's really important. So I'll stop there. Happy to answer questions. I know we did a lot, but I'm happy to go in any direction folks want to talk about.
So if the Supreme Court changed their mind on same-sex marriage, would it be for new marriages or would people be unmarried, like I said before?
Yeah, that's a great question. First I just want to say that if there is not currently a case challenging marriage that would make its way to the Supreme Court. So I just want to say we are not there yet. I know it's scary, and I think we need to talk about the reality of it, but I just want to say, we are not there. There is court precedent that they would not undo marriages, and specifically in California, there is an example, right? So I moved to California in the summer of 2008. Couples got married. Prop 8 passed. They did not undo those marriages, even though they were in a window between when a lower court had said you can or you can't or whatever. And so there's precedent to not undo. And in legal theory, and I'm not a lawyer, but in legal theory, there's sort of reliance doctrine, which is that you did a thing that was legal and you built your life around it. And the courts typically don't want to then go back and be like, well, but that shouldn't have been allowed, and so we're going to make you undo all of it. The current legal thinking from all of the legal groups that we engage with regularly is that it would be marriages moving forward. But something important happened 2 years ago, which is at the federal level, Congress passed the Respect for Marriage Act, and it was actually bipartisan, and I think that's really important in this moment to realize. Many of those Republicans aren't currently in Congress, but it was bipartisan. And what it says is that if you were legally married anywhere in the United States, whether you live in that state or not, the federal government must recognize that marriage, and your state must recognize that marriage, even if they don't allow you to marry in your state. So we go back to where we were, where in 2014, you could have gone to Illinois and gotten married. You would come back here, and the state of Michigan must recognize that marriage, and so would the federal government. So we are in a different landscape. It is not like poof, Obergefell goes away and we go back to what was the law of the land. It's changed. It doesn't mean that you still shouldn't have a power of attorney and have a will and do all the things that we did before marriage. We still need to do those things. In part because I think what's more likely to happen is an erosion of the recognition of your marriage license. So the Catholic hospital might say, you know what, it violates my religious beliefs to let you into the hospital room, or, you know, or a business doesn't have to recognize it. This court seems more open to that kind of carving away than a full overturning. But we aren't there yet either. And so I think we need to be real about it. And I will just say, you know, I know, for example, that a state rep here in Michigan who lives here in Ann Arbor introduced a bill to repeal Michigan's statutory ban on marriage and eventually to repeal the constitutional ban. That's important. I would argue right now, we need better protections for trans people in this state, like today. We should get to the marriage cleanup, but I don't worry about that the way that I worry about my trans neighbors being protected. If we only have so much political capital, I would argue we should do that work. But we can disagree.
My question relates to that healthcare shield law that you would like to see. It
Yeah.
seems like a great opportunity for ally building, coalition building. And it kind of relates to, I had a question about the DEI work as well. I'm interested in what you know that's happening around that space because these are issues that impact not just LGBT folks, but then if you're talking about healthcare, choice protection, that's,
Yep.
you know, women's access to reproductive health. And maybe even, I haven't heard you talk about any disability rights organizations who also tend to be, you know, discriminated against
Yep.
minority that have a lot of investment in bodily autonomy. Is there coalition work happening around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So definitely the SHIELD laws, our movement and reproductive abortion rights advocates work together on many of these. So many of these came from SB, whatever it was in Texas, that was basically like, if you transport someone or help transport someone out of state to get an abortion, Texas is going to come after you. And so when Texas passed that law, a lot of states, California, Oregon, Washington, were like, no. And so those bills were specifically around abortion, but we were realizing, wait, this is the same playbook. The anti-abortion playbook is very similar to the anti-trans healthcare playbook in terms of going after providers, going after insurance coverage, doing these different things. And so that has been a place for definitely a lot of coalition building and joint work. I think that the discussion around sort of body autonomy is an interesting one. I think there are a lot of connections between reproductive justice and access to abortion and bodily autonomy and decision-making around healthcare. I think about it sort of as like there are a lot of similarities and we should be working together, but there are some important differences, particularly for minors. An abortion typically is a one-time thing that you go to a doctor and you have, and then you move about your life. Healthcare for trans kids is not a one-time thing. It is, in the best case and the way that the healthcare standards lay out, it is a continuous conversation and process, especially for kids. And so I think we just have to acknowledge those nuances and like, how does a trans kid navigate that without having to tell their parents? We need, in my opinion, we need systems to support trans kids whose parents are not welcoming and affirming. But I also think we need it's a different role of a parent, in my opinion, versus an abortion, you know, for a 16-year-old. And parental notification, I think, is different. So there are similarities and differences, but I think we are definitely working together. And definitely, I think around disability, I would say that COVID, I think, really cracked open a lot more cross-movement work around sort of accessibility, the disproportionate impact of COVID on different communities, and it kind of brought us together in new ways. Oh, and this is the SHIELD map. Sorry, I pulled it up just so you could see which states. Yeah.
Going back to the Supreme Court, you mentioned that there's a case there right now about Tennessee's healthcare ban. What do you foresee the fallout being if they come down against us? And also, what's the delay if they're supposed to rule on that today? Do you know?
So I'm going to pull up the map just because I think it's helpful, especially in this context. So this is the current map around bans on healthcare for trans youth. So the orange states are the states with the bans. So the case is specifically about Tennessee. It was argued in the fall by the first openly trans person, Chase Strangio, argued it in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, which is amazing. So typically what happens is when cases are argued, the court can issue rulings anytime. Often, for blockbuster cases, they wait until June. And then there are decision days you can go on SCOTUS blog and see what days have been designated as decision days. Today was the first potential decision day, and they did issue 3 decisions today, not Scrimetti, which is the case. It will come before the end of the term, which typically is like June 30th. They have several times pushed into July, but typically it will be between now and June, because that's when the term ends. So any case that was argued has to be decided by then. So we are waiting. The next potential decision day, it could come outside of that, but the next potential decision day is next Thursday. I do want to note that the decision will come, and the ACLU National and Lambda Legal that night will have events in New York and DC. And then that following Saturday, right after the decision comes, they are encouraging local communities to do something. So you should be able to go on their website and find what is happening in our community and in Michigan, to be together with people and to have our reactions that we're going to have to what could happen. What that case could mean, I think, is important. In the worst case, the court will say, this ban is fine. That will not change the states that are green. It will not ban care nationwide for trans youth. It will leave the map as it is right now. Now, some states that have been wanting to ban care might be like, oh, we've been given a green light by the US Supreme Court to do that. But you can notice there aren't very many states that don't have a ban or that don't have protections. So you might see Wisconsin, maybe Virginia, I doubt Nevada. So it doesn't actually change, like if you live here, we don't have a ban, that case is not gonna impact your child's ability to get care. I think that's really important. They could strike down the ban. I'm not feeling that optimistic, but they haven't issued a ruling, so we'll see. And that will be devastating, and I think we just need to name that. And something I find a lot of joy and comfort in is in states that have bans, there are networks and mutual aid things that have been set up to connect kids with providers and to separately find money to pay those providers and to make sure that we're doing our best. It doesn't mean that every single trans kid is getting the care that they need, but I think we've definitely, as a movement, tried to mobilize as best we can. Other questions? Thoughts?
I guess that's it. Thank you so much, Naomi, for all of this information.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. Happy Pride, everybody.